After almost a 10-year gap where all we got were 2 TV shows, we're finally going to see Scream on the big screen once again. Unlike most of its contemporaries, when Scream stopped returning a profit, Wes Craven closed the book for good, and it was not immediately rebooted or remade. It's kind of crazy. It actually took quite a long time for anything to happen with the franchise, which really was honestly kind of nice. Usually when you have a movie that's the 4th one in a series and it fails to return profit at the box office, the first thing you see is an almost immediate remake of the original film or a reboot to breathe new life into the franchise. And we didn't get that with Scream, which was, again, kind of nice. Instead, like I already mentioned, what we got was a 2-season TV show on MTV with a Halloween special that ended the series and then a new revival of the franchise on VH1 that was okay, if not a little bit messy. But it seems like 10 years is the magic number for when you can bring back a dormant franchise that hasn't been in theaters for too long, because just like with Halloween, we are getting a new Scream movie right around its 10th anniversary. And just like with Halloween, the fallout of the Weinsteins losing this license means we're actually going to have something worth being excited for the first time in a really long time. And even crazier, it seems like they're actually pretty organized on the filmmaking side of things, because even though it's pretty far out at this point, like to the point where it doesn't even have a release date, we actually know quite a bit about the film. It's probably going to be called Scream 5, Neve Campbell is coming back to play Sid, David Arquette has already signed on to play Dewey, and they already have directors attached to it who are awesome. I'm really excited by what we've seen so far. The only thing other than Wes Craven not being able to direct this since he's no longer with us that's kind of bothering me a little bit is that Kevin Williamson, who wrote Scream 1, 2, 4 and also the outline for 3, is not writing this movie. He's just executive producing it. But the interesting thing there is that when Scream 4 was being conceptualized, him and Wes Craven were brought on with the understanding that if it did succeed at the box office, they'd be able to do Scream 5 and 6. So they went into this with an outline for a complete trilogy of new movies. Obviously, we now know that Scream 5 and 6 didn't happen for a few reasons, ranging from Wes Craven's untimely death to the fact that Scream 4 didn't even manage to break even at the box office. But knowing that they had these outlines for those 2 movies, I'm assuming they'll go back and tweak them just a little bit and then have a new writer come in and make an entire screenplay for the rest of the movie. The main reason for that is an interview I read on a site called 2Fab with Matthew Lillard, where they talked about Wes Craven's legacy, and when he was asked about it, he said, "I guarantee you Neve is a voracious protector of Wes like nobody else. She won't do it unless there's a really clear idea that she's excited about." Now that's not new information or anything, because Neve Campbell has been extremely vocal on the topic over the years, but in my mind, if you're going to use a story that honors Wes Craven's legacy to the point that she's going to come back to the franchise, you're probably going to take an outline for Scream 5 and potentially 6 that he came up with Kevin Williamson back when he was alive. It kind of just makes sense to me from that perspective. When you look at these returning franchises like Halloween and Scream, and definitely down the line A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, if you ask me whether or not I want a reboot or a full-on sequel that acknowledges the rest of the movies, 9 times out of 10, I'm going with the sequel. And that's definitely true for something like Scream. But with Halloween 2018, I have to say I was a lot more confident in that movie's direction, because from the very start, they were talking about it being a direct sequel to the first movie. They got Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter on board, and they got a great director in David Gordon Green. And also, Blumhouse's track record, even though they put out some stinkers, is really good so far, so at the time, I was really excited about it. But with Scream 5, I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sold just yet, mainly because we don't have Wes Craven, we don't have Kevin Williamson writing the screenplay, and we also don't have all of the main core cast back. So I wanted to get another perspective from someone who would prefer a reboot over a full-on sequel. So I asked my friend Doctor Wolfula if he wanted to provide a clip, and he gave me some pretty good arguments here.
Greetings, Dr. Wolfula here, honored and humbled to be asked by Jimmy to share my brief thoughts on the upcoming Scream 5. I admit that I'm a fairly opinionated fan of the Scream franchise, a series I feel had greater potential, but just kinda went into some bad, uninteresting directions, at no fault by the late Wes Craven, who directed the films. The issues stem from the writing of the sequels by Kevin Williamson and Aaron Kruger with Scream 3, but hopefully, with a clean break from the original writer, the series can finally go into some interesting directions. The Scream franchise, I feel, inherently needs sequels as a proper slasher send-up, but it never felt like past Scream 2 there was a clear idea of what to do with the characters, and they're only seem to be a vague idea of how to commentate on slasher tropes. Scream 3 and 4 seem to just be more interested in being as meta as possible by commentating more on the film industry to the point of self-parody than doing what the original film did so well, taking well-trod horror tropes and subverting them, refreshing a subgenre. With even Halloween 2018 making some meta reference to the multiple timelines, I feel Scream 5 needs to be more grounded and just go back to what made the original movie so groundbreaking, taking the old and familiar and making it seem cool and fresh. The other issue Scream 5 needs to address is the character problem. The whole surviving cast seems to be returning, which is neat to fans, but it's kinda unfortunate to me. The main trio of characters just isn't interesting to me anymore. The Scream franchise made a lot of mistakes with its characters, but the biggest was having a constant immortal trio of characters instead of building up a stable of characters introduced throughout that could die when necessary and have weighty deaths. Anytime I see a new character not part of the trio, I know they're gonna die at this point. I feel at this stage in the franchise, if the three characters are returning, either something really interesting needs to happen with them, or they need to be killed off already. Gale and Dewey aren't real-life married anymore. Their relationship is not cute. Sydney Prescott is such a wasted potential in this series. It never felt like she was given a chance to grow beyond her PTSD. She's become such an inert, boring, sad character over time who doesn't have anything going on in her life besides writing books about her tragedy. I feel like Sydney's only ever strong when she's in fight or flight mode, but otherwise she's just moping all the time. I understand what she's going through, but if she doesn't have anything going on for her, and she's just sad all the time, it's hard to still be interested in her being the central figure. I either want to see a new cast of characters take center stage, or see some other, more interesting developments on Sydney's character that can elevate her beyond what she's been for a few movies now. Like, Scream Resurrection was controversial, but seeing a totally different cast of characters from the usual suburban teens was a nice change of pace to me, honestly. Finally, I hope Stu will return, played by Matthew Lillard. We need more of that guy, and he was supposed to come back in Scream 3 anyway, so just finally do it. Anyway, Doc out. Thanks for having me on, Jimmy.
I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this early in the game, and especially after watching that clip, I could go either way on the topic at this point. I think Doc made an especially great point that this deep into the franchise, we're on the 5th movie after all, the main characters are starting to feel stale, and that mainly comes down to the fact that they haven't really evolved that much as the franchise has gone on, and they kind of have ridiculous amounts of plot armor. I also think he makes a great point about us needing to see some new characters who can become main characters as the franchise goes on from here, because if they do this right, it will make a lot of money and we will see more Scream movies. I think it would be really cool if these newer characters were younger people who grew up throughout the early 2000s and saw movies like Stab in the universe or Scream in our universe and know about new movies that are coming out, because I guarantee you that Sydney and Dewey and Gale, they aren't watching a lot of horror movies. They're probably really sick of horror movies, so they're gonna need some new blood, and I think Samara Weaving would be a great choice based especially on who's directing this movie, and I think she'll probably end up in it in some capacity. But the reason I'm leaning towards really wanting a sequel over a full-on reboot is that it's so rare to have a franchise like this that's this big in the horror world especially that hasn't exactly had a bad movie. We have 4 Scream movies that are all canon, and the worst one is Scream 3, and it's not even bad. It's still extremely watchable, and that's crazier when you consider that Scream 2 was a total rush job where they had to change the script because it leaked online and they had to make sure people would be surprised enough to go see it in the theaters. And on top of that, unlike its contemporaries like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th, Wes Craven didn't bounce off of this after the first movie. He bucked a trend that he admittedly contributed to and stuck around for the entire franchise so far. I think that's really cool, and it's something that's kind of worth protecting. And another huge difference between Scream and the movies I just mentioned is that the main core cast's drama is really integral to what Scream is. You know, the love arcs, the early 2000s music, the fact that none of the main characters die and you can really root for them throughout the entire thing, even though though it still manages to be scary in the long run. And just to be clear, I don't think those aspects are going anywhere with the franchise because we have Williamson to thank for them. He's the guy behind Dawson's Creek and Vampire Diaries. But this late in the game, I think it's really cool that we have a franchise like Scream that has a huge fan base of horror fans who like stuff like Halloween and like stuff like Friday the 13th, but it never killed off any of its main characters. It's just kind of rare and it's different, and I feel like that's what we need at this point. But I'm gonna be real with you guys, if the intention, and I'm sure this is the intention, is to make Scream 6 and then Scream 7, 8, and 9 as a new trilogy, we really need to see these characters pass the torch to some younger actors. I don't think it's gonna be dynamic or fun to see 60-year-old people running around in Woodsboro getting stalked by a serial killer. That just sounds kind of lame if you ask me. But with Scream 5 on the meta satirical side of the story, I think there's an awesome opportunity here to tackle the idea of a reboot and what that means for these main characters. I can definitely see a story where Sid and Gale and Dewey, these characters who are weirdly experienced at taking on serial killers, are put through kills that are picked from throughout the franchise, but there's a major shift in them that kind of put them off guard and challenge them in ways we haven't seen before. It just seems like the perfect opportunity since Scream has been gone for 10 years and we kind of are getting into the reboot timeline territory. I was going back and forth on this, but I think Doc is definitely right that they do need to kill off one of the main characters, and I also think they should take it one step further and finally have a villain who spans the course of more than one movie. Make him feel really evil and actually scary. I feel like as the viewer, 5 movies in, we need to be put off guard a little bit, and so does the main cast. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to kill one of them off. And just like Doc mentioned, a great killer for this movie would be Stu. I want to see him return in some way because Matthew Lillard does not get the credit he deserves in Hollywood, and it's not out of the realm of possibility in the sense that Stu has almost come back to be the killer multiple times in the Scream franchise. And honestly, I don't have an argument for the fact that we're 5 movies in at this point and this franchise has rigidly followed the same rules throughout its entire 4-movie run. I feel like the best way to make it scary again is to break some of those rules right from the very beginning to make the main characters scared. And that's not out of the realm of possibility at all, considering the directors of this movie are the guys behind Ready or Not, which was one of the best horror movies of last year, no question, and they also directed a short in VHS, which I really liked, and on top of that, they did the rapper story in Southbound, which I think might be the best short in that movie. So these guys have kind of built their career on subverting expectations with their movies, and I think they're perfect for this job. Obviously, they don't have enough under their belt to say whether or not they could live up to Wes Craven's legacy, but they did get Neve Campbell to come back, so I'd say they're off to a great start. And the last reason I'm excited for Scream 5 to be a full-on sequel mainly comes down to nostalgia. Scream was coming out as I was growing up, but it was one of the rare R-rated horror movies I was allowed to watch because there was no nudity and no over-the-top gore. So when Scream 4 came out, I was a freshman in high school, and it was really cool to get to go see a Scream movie in theaters. I want that experience back again, and it's kind of selfish, but I don't care. I'm glad these characters are coming back, I'm glad we're getting at least one more movie with them, and I'm glad that they're doing the right thing and honoring Wes Craven's legacy. Like, it doesn't feel like this movie's gonna be bad right now, and that's what I'm really excited about. And yeah, I'll admit that I'm showing my bias just a little bit there, but that's why I brought in Doc to balance me out. You know, you get both sides of the equation and I don't look like a hack. But now that you've heard our opinions, I want to hear yours down in the comments below. Is a full-on sequel the best choice here, or should they do a reboot? And of course, if by some fluke you're not subscribed to Doctor Wolfula already, definitely go over to his channel and watch all of his videos. He's been doing this for a really long time, and it's honestly, I'm gonna fanboy a little bit. It is a big deal for him to collab with me. I think it was really cool of him to do that, and it was nice that he put so much effort into making that video. So go subscribe to him. He's one of the coolest channels out there. You won't be disappointed. And the last person I have to give a shout out to in this video is my friend Justin, aka Black Coffee. He did the awesome little cartoon version of me you saw in the thumbnail. He did the art for my podcast Fear Frequency, and he also has me co-hosting on his podcast Pool Pool. So if you want to see any of his stuff, which I highly encourage you to check out, it's all linked down in the description. So that about covers it for Scream 5. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and if you haven't checked that notification bell in a while, I'd encourage you to maybe click on it and hit the all button so every time I upload a video, you get a notification on your phone and in your email. Anyway guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.